to the May 15th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting of the Lee Summit School District. We'll begin with item 1.01, contracts $15,000 and less. The items you see presented on this list are fairly typical for this time of year, wrapping up this school year, some end of the year activities, but also then prepping for next fall. Activities and things that we have going on at the schools and our departments, but fairly typical for this time of year. Are there any questions about any items that are on this list? All right, thank you. Moving on to 1.02, contracts greater than 15,000. As a reminder, what we bring to the Finance Committee as well as to the board for specific conversation or unique conversation are those that are new or renewals who have maybe a large increase. So you'll see some items on here that in that third column from the left, new or renewal. There are some renewals on here. There are many new as well. The new items will be discussed later in the meeting, as well as any of the renewals that met that threshold of I'll say a large increase that we need to discuss. Are there any items on this list that you would like to discuss that aren't going to be discussed later in the meeting? All right. Moving on to 1.03, inventory copy paper. And Ms. Battaglia will cover this topic.
Good morning, everyone. Our school district participates in the Greater Suburban Kansas City Joint Purchasing Cooperative, and that is made up of several school districts that are right around our area. They include Blue Springs, Independence, Lone Jack, Pleasant Hill, Oak Grove, just to name a few. And we get together every year and put out a bid for copy paper. And this is copy paper that we purchase by the truckload. And we take several truckloads over the course of the summer to gear up for the new school year. Park Hill School District was the lead agency on this particular copy bid. And they had originally wanted to award to two vendors, PaperCore and Office Products Alliance. And halfway through vetting that or awarding that, we just found out that the PaperCore had on their bid had bid all or nothing. So that kind of changed or shifted the co-op's recommendation for award. And initially, I believe in our packet, we had that we wanted to award to the two vendors, but now that has changed to an award just to PaperCore. And they, between the two of them, they are the overall low. So we are recommending award to PaperCore for those truckloads of paper that we take over the summer. Just a little information for you. We do spend about $154,000, give or take, depending, on the need for the school year. But that is kind of a typical average for us for copy paper. And that's all sizes and all colors. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mrs. Battaglia.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 1.04, Kelly Services, teacher substitute rate increase. Are there any questions about this? This is an item that we're keeping with the market, if you will. So there's an increase both to the daily substitute rate as well as a long-term rate. Okay, moving on to 1.05. And this will be, is it Kinsey? Are you going to take this today, Mrs. Witterson?
Yes, I can do that. Good morning. The item for here is the additional items for our network replacement. And we did a bid for the majority of this work through the Federal Communication Commission, so FCC. They have a E-rate program that helps fund technology for districts. There's some limitations to that program, as well as our anticipation that we were going to use all of those funds with the bulk of what we bid. So we pulled some items separately and handled those after a decision was made on the bulk of the network. So this is for the Missouri Innovation Campus and special use cases such as, Kevin's letting me know my audio is poor, just a second.
We'll give this a try. This is for special use cases and the Missouri Innovation Campus, performing arts centers, gyms, things like that are our special use areas, cafeterias, where we see particularly high capacity. Any questions on this item, I guess?
I just have a question about the E-rate program. Is that just a lump sum that gets allocated, if you will, to the district, and it doesn't reset at any point based off of a fiscal year? Or is there like an allocation per year and we've used up our yearly? How does that work?
There's two programs. This falls under what they consider Category 2. Category 2 is on a 5-year cycle. So the rate that we get, I believe, is based off of student count, dollar per student, and then it is, I want to say refundable, but that's not the right word. It's allocatable based on a percentage of expenditure. So historically, we were at a 50%. Then we, last year, our free and reduced number put us into a 40%. And for this coming year, we should be back at the 50% mark.
Okay. So, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to add, so it is based annually on free reduced lunch rate. So poverty rate, it ranges from 20 to 90%, the rate a district and public libraries can get to help with internet access.
Okay. So with this portion of it that's going towards MIC, is there any part of that UCM offsets, or is that just something that kind of gets absorbed into their whatever lease agreement or whatever other agreement we have established with UCM?
So, Mr. Holder, I'm going to speak to this, but correct me if I'm wrong. Every year we have a true up with UCM on operational cost. And so this would be calculated into that calculation, and then they would pay at the 57% that goes, which is their portion of the operational cost of MIC.
Okay.
That's correct, Dr. Phil.
Thank you.
Yeah, our current MOU with UCM, it treats internet services just like it does a utility.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Wooderson. Any additional questions on this item? Moving on to item 1.06, MIC campus firewall. Dr. Whaley, Mrs. Wooderson.
Yeah, Kenzie's Zoom is having some issues today. So this falls right in line with our discussion on E-rate and costs and how they're allocated back to UCM. So this is for a firewall between Lee Summit and UCM, the two networks. It's good network security to put this in place. We haven't done it in the past because what we had in place worked up until recently. So we kind of reevaluated and said this needs to be brought up to speed with how we would normally do things with connections between entities. It's a 5-year agreement, and it's going to protect not only their traffic from us that may be, at times not any due part to them, but bad actors, any malicious traffic coming from them or any traffic coming from us to them. So it kind of puts a safeguard between the two parties.
Thank you, Dr. Whaley. Any questions about item 1.06? Moving on to 1.07, adaptive schools. Turn this over to Dr. Barger or
Mrs. Merrill, our Director of Professional Development, is going to talk about adaptive schools. She's coordinating that.
Good morning. So Dr. Buck and I had a meeting this summer about adaptive schools and bringing this opportunity forward to our leadership, whether it be district leadership, building leadership, or teacher leadership. And adaptive schools, the thinking behind it is being able to take what we do currently for collaboration, for PLCs. So whether it's looking around student data, whether it is looking at maybe some changes that we might be making in our buildings for improvement. At the end of the day, it's about making us all more effective with our ability to be communicators, listeners, collaborators, and have systems and structures and strategies in place so we can be more effective in that. This year, we are working with Tony Prickett, who the contract is through. And through that work, not only will we be training many of our district leaders and teacher leaders, but we will also be training myself, Dr. Janeway, and Dr. Novinsky. And at the remainder of this year, the three of us will become trainers for our district. Was there a question? I'm sorry, I heard someone cut in. So after this point, the three of us will be able to then provide that opportunity for training, which I happen to know several buildings are asking for that in the 25-26 school year to be presented to their teams for their PLCs. So it might be their building leadership teams. It might be other PLCs that they have working in their building, but they have asked us to bring that to their buildings, and we'll be able to do that at no cost for training because the three of us will be able to provide that training forward using the adaptive schools curriculum, if you will, using their structures that they have in place. And we'll be able to take that forward. And so far, our responses and results have been incredible. We've had folks who have attended our training already this year who have said that has changed building leaders and teachers, that has changed the way they are working with their staff, and also teachers with the way that they are teaching their students and providing more opportunity for greater student voice and greater student collaboration within their lessons. Questions?
Merrill. Are there any questions?
I don't really have a question. I asked a couple of questions in the board packet just about the trainer, but I was just curious if there's a little more information that maybe could be provided to the board just about the program, because I looked online and there's, typically with these types of programs, there's just kind of some vague description, but you don't really have access to any training materials or additional information, obviously, because, you have to pay for it. But
Sure.
Since we've already used this program last year, I'm just kind of curious, like a little bit more detail just to kind of help me or any fellow board members who are curious to just understand what kind of track our leaders are going through when they're doing this sort of training, since it's going to kind of inform their leadership style in their buildings and how they work with their folks in the buildings and how teachers work with each other. So that would be awesome if you have something like that you could share.
So Heather, board member Essick, I put in the a response, and you'll get the board question update this morning. Linda and I just talked about that right before this meeting. I included a website in there, but here's what I would say. It's mostly about facilitating skills to increase engagement of participants. So if you ever seen Dr. Barger or myself or Ms. Sanders when we present and we're not the czar in front of the room, instead we're mining the engagement and collective wisdom of a group, that's really what these strategies are. And I have a adaptive school book they wrote. So next time you're over here, I guess tomorrow, if you want, I can let you borrow my book.
That would be great. So another question then. I know we do as a district have kind of a leader training program, right? Kind of a, I don't know if it's a principal's academy or something where you're cultivating some of the people in the district who express an interest in wanting to move up. Is this going to be part of that training in the future then? Is that going to be integrated into that?
So the Principal Academy is a 2-year program that Dr. Herzog and Dr. Kinney run. We've had that. This is year 2 of the current cohort, and they'll start another cohort next year. And they really first year focus on internal, what's the workings, what you see the bigger dance floor, if you will. And the second year, what's outside your building that supports your building level leadership. So I don't know if they have the space in there with what their current structure is. We also have a new program we're going to start next year that Dr. Merrill and I are starting with uber focused on instructional strategies. It could, obviously parts of the strategies are used within that, but I don't know if we'll actually do adaptive schools training as a set aside like 4 straight days, because it is 4 days, because that we already have 8 days built into that work that Kristen Merrill and we just had the selection actually yesterday. So folks had 80 applicants for 35 seats. So we announced the 35 first cohort for next year. So no, not necessarily. I think it's going to be a standalone piece because it's a 4-day training, and it's pretty intense training. It's wonderful training. The feedback has been fantastic from our participants so far.
Board Member Eslick, I would say we have our assistant principals who have been invited into the mix and some teacher leaders. So even though not formalized through that program, I think in terms of when you think about building your bench and making sure they have exposure, I think that's one way some of the up and coming leaders will get it too.
We had about 50 individuals complete it this year, and the plan is to always every year have at least 50 more participate.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 1.08, language services. Dr. Berger, Mrs. Sanders.
Good morning. So we bring today Proprio Language Services. And Proprio Language Services is a local company out of Overland Park. They're also a member of the co-op that Ms. Battaglia mentioned earlier. And they provide translation and interpreting services. And their interpreting services are via phone, via video web chat, and also in-person services. And these will be available to parents, staff, as they need support within the district. We use 2 companies right now currently to try to feed that need, and it runs through student services. But the partnership with Proprio will allow each department and building to have a code. And so if HR has a new employee that comes in or a candidate and they need a translation or interpreting services, they can then access that and it will be billed towards their building code or the department code. Proprio also has the option for families to call in. So oftentimes, the way it's set up now, the district initiates, we call our current company, then we call the parents or the staff, and it works like that. But it doesn't allow staff or parents to call in and receive those interpreting services. And so there will be a number that they can call. There will be an interpreter that gets on the line and will direct them to the correct department or building, and then be on the phone when they get connected to the building or department. So we are very excited about this partnership to be able to expand our services beyond students and families, but into the staff realm and give our departments and buildings a lot of, I guess, autonomy and authority to be able to serve better. So thank you.
I just have a really quick question. I think that this is awesome. I'm just curious, how do the buildings, like not just your ELL teachers, but like just as an example, in a school visit, nutrition services had used, I don't know how they did it, but they used labels over the foods, and they had a student who was Ukrainian, so they were able to translate all of that. So like, just for example, how does nutrition services know that like this resource exists for their people to be able to use in that instance? What's that communication plan look like to share this amazing resource with those who might need it outside of just ELL?
Yep. So thank you for that question, because this is beyond ELL. And right now it sort of lives in ELL. So this partnership will it will allow us to bump it out of equity and student services and district-wide. So what will happen is once we get this approved, we will start having training sessions where we will invite department heads and building heads and staff to be able to get some training from Proprio on how to access it. The idea would be that we also do some parent training on how they can access. There's an app. I think what you're talking about specifically in that situation is I'm pretty sure they probably use Google Translate. And while Google Translate is a pretty convenient tool, we can't guarantee the correctness of the translations. And so we will want people to default to an organization that we can back up that what we're putting out is actually correct. So then they would feed through Lori Danella and request it be translated, or they can work with the building.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 1.09, school links. Dr. Barger, or let's see.
Mrs. Booth is going to take
Booth.
this. This is
Mrs.
her.
Booth. Thank you.
Good morning. School Links is a college and career readiness platform that we utilize we haven't utilized School Links. We've been using a program called Navient to do this. What we use Navient for currently is college transcripts and scholarships. The counseling department has been using it heavily to have kids log in and say, I need transcripts sent to this college. And then we also are able to do college rep visits through that program. Unfortunately, Navient hasn't grown with some of the trends in college and career readiness. They've kind of stayed just on the college side of things. And we were looking for a platform that offered all things to our students, so they can still do all of the college transcripts for the kids that are going to college and doing those things. But there's also a whole side to School Links that allows students to look at some vocational offerings, some trade schools. We can track our market value assets within this program. We can gather a database of partners and possibly have a platform where jobs can be posted for students that are looking when they graduate instead of just the college piece. And it will allow a one-stop shop to do all of those things instead of two separate programs like we are currently using with Navient and Transio. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Mrs. Booth. Moving on to section 2, facilities, 2.01, quality mechanical, Bernard Campbell, HVAC replacement. You may recall in past board meetings, we approved the purchase of the equipment through a co-op agreement. This agenda item is approving the installation of that equipment this summer. We went out to bid and initially had one response. In the preliminary discussions with contractors, we had 4 or 5 interested contractors. Only one of those contractors responded to that RFP. We then started soliciting more vendors to respond through a co-op. We were able to secure another response, and this is asking for approval for that vendor. So the administration is recommending the replacement of the Bernard Campbell HVAC system to the quality mechanical at a price of $1.2 million. Are there any questions about this agenda item?
Dr. Shelton, I don't really have a question about this particular item, but I think we've had this conversation a couple of times, and it's still a little bit concerning that we have such a hard time getting people to bid our projects. The people who decided not to bid, did we get any feedback as to why that was? Just overloaded with work, had no interest? Like, what was the deal?
The amount of work that's out there currently, they didn't feel like they could fit it into their schedules for this summer. We have a very limited window of time to do the work. And so that's typically the response we get. There's just a lot of work out there for our contractors, and that's what we're seeing. So I will tell you that Kyle Gorell and his team do a really good job of communicating, advocating for our projects, communicating with our contractors, and soliciting those bids. And as you know, we're just at a time in the market where there's just a lot of jobs, a lot of work out there already.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks.
I will tell you, through his work, I think the initial one response we had was, I think, 2.8 million. And so this one came in obviously well below that. And so through their work, we're going to save significantly on the installation of these HVAC units.
Yeah, I did see that. And, I think the savings is great. Don't get me wrong. But when you see those big swings,
I know.
2.8 to 1.2, sometimes my question then becomes, what is missing? Like that's a big substantial difference. And I'm not saying there is anything missing and that that due diligence wasn't done. Obviously that's a big swing. So it raises some eyebrows.
Yeah, we had the same question. So we brought the contractor in, sat him down, really had deep discussions as to the scope of the work, and they're confident. They're confident they understand the work that has to be done and the bid they brought forward to do it.
Well, we will definitely see. I hope that smooth sailing for them the whole way through, and there's no change orders or anything like that.
I totally agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to 2.02 Blue Bear on-call painting. Once again, a very similar process. We paint a lot of walls in our district throughout the year, either as routine maintenance or in response to something that's happened. So Blue Bear is our on-call painter. Very similar to what happened with the last agenda item. This bidder came in significantly lower than the rest of the market, and so once again we sat down with them, explained to them the scope of work. They also they're the on-call painters for a number of cities. I think the city of Lee Summit, but also KU, University of Kansas. And so we're confident that they have the ability to do the scope of work. And so we're bringing them forward as our recommendation. Are there any questions about this agenda item? All right, moving on to 2.03 Will Pave. You may recall a handful of years ago, the city and the district entered into an agreement related to the 291-50 interchange improvements. Part of that agreement for us required us to redesign a portion of our parking lot at Lee Summit High School, and this is the work that is being done in regards to that. I will tell you, this work has to be done first for the rest of the project to move forward. Are there any questions regarding this agenda item? All right, and moving on to 2.04, the bond budget update. You'll notice, Ms. Pruitt, if you'll go to the bottom, and then the second column from the right, you can see that would you slide over to the other part of go the other direction. There you go. Thank you. We show a little over $1 million left in funds for this project. You'll notice here in a little bit when Mr. Holder goes through his report, he'll report out that we have actually in the bank a little over $7 million in our bond funds. And our hope is to have all 7 million of that spent by the time we get to June 30th. And so we're waiting on some final pay apps as well as some other expenditures to come through to get that spent. But we hope to wrap up the bond expenditures in this fiscal year. Are there any questions on this agenda item? All right.
Sorry about that.
No, please, no.
Are we going to talk about it? It might not be on this line, but I don't know what the payment is called. Whatever we're going to owe for making too much money on our bond funds. Is that going to happen later?
Arbitrage. Mr. Holder, do you want to address that? I know that we've been working with our bond counsel to solidify actually what that number is. And I know that
if we're talking about it later, it's okay to wait. I just didn't know if we were going to.
No, I mean, well, when I go over bond expenses, well, actually bond revenues is where that hits. I mean, you'll see that we're above what we've budgeted. So at the end of the day, what that really means is when you see that revenue go up each month, which, as Dr. Shelton alluded to, we would really like to get this money spent by June 30th. The main reason for that is not necessarily arbitrage, because we are still keeping, part of any interest that we earn. It's the close of the fiscal year, and it's just from an accounting standpoint. It's nice if you can close out a bond issue and not cross over fiscal years. It's okay if we don't. It's just it's a goal that we have to try to get it finished, because most of these projects are well wrapped up. It's punch list items. In some cases, it's final billing that we're waiting on. And so Kyle's team is really trying to get that going. In terms of when we pay it, when the bond funds are completely finished in June, there'll be a calculation that's done. And then there'll be a determination on when it would be most advantageous for us. I believe with the calculation that we're using, which greatly reduced the potential amount of arbitrage that we would have to pay, it will be advantageous for us to do this sooner rather than later. So likely it'll be next fiscal year's expense, and we will just incorporate that into our Fund 4 budget. And realistically, as you know, bond funds from an accounting standpoint are in the capital projects fund. It's commingled in terms of the way that the state looks at our capital projects funds. We separate out the bond just so we can, obviously track those expenses. But we've really reached the point in the project where literally we will get some interest money in July, even though if we spend everything in June. So it's just tidying up those details. And as part of that, we'll make sure that we allocate enough funds for the arbitrage, which we anticipate will probably be between $200,000 and $250,000.
Okay.
The initial calculation was, I believe, over $1 million. And Mr. Holder, through his due diligence and with Gilmore Bell, our bond counsel, worked diligently to get that number down. So, time well spent on his part and their part to get that number down.
Absolutely. Is it just what was being calculated was wrong?
Yeah.
And so a reevaluation?
It was just the timing of how they're calculating it. We sold the bonds in two different tranches, and how the initial calculation was done was as if they were two separate, but really in reality, it was a blended sell, if you will, because of the projects. The projects kind of overlapped the sell of the two tranches, and because of that overlap in the sell, we were allowed to recalculate based on that. And so it wasn't as clean as what the initial calculation was. So when we recalculated based on that blended vantage point, then it reduced that number quite a bit.
And I will say it's probably been 4 decades since we had this high interest rate, so you earn the money to cause this problem. Gilbert Bell had to learn on the fly as well. So their initial take on it, they had to do some deep research and work with us to make sure we're doing right by our taxpayers.
Well, that sounds like a lot of work. So thank you, Dr. Shelton and Mr. Holder, because saving $750,000 sounds like well worth it. So
I totally agree. All right, moving on to Section 3, Finance, 3.01, Transfer of Funds.
All right, our first item is our normal monthly transfer of funds, and you'll notice once we get to that page, here we go. The $1.9 million figure, that's lower than we normally have, and the reason for that is we did finally in April receive our early childhood special education reimbursement. And that is the majority, not all of that, but a lot of that comes into Fund 2. So the special revenue fund. And so that is an immediate offset then, because we don't normally, that's one-time revenue that we receive every year. So that brings the transfer amount down. Normally that's in the neighborhood of 5 million, a little above or a little below. So that's why that number is a little bit lower this month. Are there any questions on the transfer? All right, our revenue and expense report. We are through April for the report that we're looking at right now. And that means we're about we are 83.3% of the way through our fiscal year. So things are really coming into focus, both from a revenue standpoint as well as an expenditure standpoint. So if we walk through this report, we'll start up in the top left corner with the revenue section. If we look at our operating revenue, we've been talking about this for several months, but you'll notice that as compared to last year, we are short about 4% there, or just under 4%. We know why that is. When you look at our local tax revenue collection, we are just over $5 million short from a percentage standpoint of where we were at the same point last year. So we'll continue to monitor that. We still do have 7 payments left that we'll get from Jackson County. We get those on a weekly basis. And so some of that could come in, but I would anticipate we will end up short in the revenue section for operating funds. Now, if we go to the next column, the special revenue fund, you'll notice that from a percentage basis, we're up. And if you look at the totals there, we're just under 0.5%. So when you combine operating and special revenue, which for the purposes of the state and our operating fund balance reserve, those funds are combined. We're just under 0.5% short. So that, in theory, is good because we will look at those in total. But 0.5% of over 261 million is about $1.3 million. So what will happen as we get to the end of June is our special revenue fund will exceed the budgeted amount there. So that's good. The question will be, how close can we get in that operating fund? And that's all going to be determined on the amount of money. Big picture, this could have an impact at the end of this fiscal year. But long term, over the course of time and essentially over the course of next fiscal year, but this could even go on till fiscal year 26. We saw that in 2019. Some of this didn't come really to fruition until FY22. So you're going from FY20 to FY22. Over the course of time, this will smooth out. But from a revenue standpoint, it could have an impact on us this year. Moving across to the debt service, the bond, the capital projects. Again, debt service, you see the same impact in debt service that you see in operating because we drive the majority of our funding in debt service from that local tax collection. So those amounts in debt service, bond, and capital projects revenue, those will not change a lot between now and the end of June. They'll go up, and debt service could go up more substantially than the other two, depending on Jackson County. But from a total dollar perspective, those 3 funds are not going to increase that much in the next 2 months. So overall, again, special revenue is really, we're benefiting from that, and it is helping. It is really lessening the impact of our operating fund collection. We'll see how it plays out over the next 2 months. Moving over to our restricted funds, nutrition services, we're really tracking pretty consistently there. We will fall short of the 10.889 million but if we drop down to the expense column, we will fall short of our budgeted expenses. So I think at the end of the day, the Nutrition Services Fund will track from a percentage basis on what we thought. And just a reminder that the 88% from last year, that is a reflection still of that payment that we received in July of 2022 that went on last fiscal year, that was a carryover that DESE was not able to get to us in June. So that always inflated our revenue numbers a little bit last year in nutrition services. If you look at the activity fund and the foundation fund, again, if we look at revenue and expenses there, pretty remarkably, those we anticipate and we budget that those always wash out. So whatever we get in revenue, we will spend. It doesn't work that way. It's usually a little bit above or below because those are restricted funds. Most of that is due to fundraising, and then of course the foundation piece of that. But it's pretty interesting that through April, at least, those revenues and expenses are almost tracking dollar for dollar. And then before and after school services, finally to the far right, again, looking at the revenue and looking at the expenses, we've seen good progress there throughout the year. That will continue in May and June. And at the end of the day, that helps, even though it's a very small impact, it still helps our bottom line that we're making progress in that area. So then moving down to the middle of the page, looking at expenses, if we start on the far left, our operating fund. Again, we've talked about this for a few months. We continue to run hot in Fund 1. As compared to last year, it's a 4% difference. I am cautiously optimistic there because we have just had several expenses. We just had a $1.2 million computer expense that ended up being a general fund expense. And when we budgeted, we were looking at that as a capital projects fund expense. And so at the end of the day, those things, when we close out the fiscal year, will end up being the same thing, because remember, Fund 1, Fund 2, and Fund 4, with the mechanism that you can levy money and move money in and out, are all considered operating in the eyes of the state. So when I look at our budget, really our Fund 1 salaries are tracking exactly where we thought they would be. So I don't feel like we'll need a 4% adjustment, which would be just under $4 million to the operating fund. But we will, when we amend the budget in June, we will raise that amount a little bit. Again, we're hopeful that will be offset. And then I'll talk about capital projects here in just a few minutes, and we'll talk about the interplay between those two things. And when we get to the June board meeting, one of the decisions we may make about how much to transfer. Special revenue fund, that's tracking exactly where we thought it would be. And if you look at the comparison to last year, again, almost identical from a percentage standpoint. So I feel good about our special revenue fund budget. Any tweaks there would just be very minor at the end of the year. Debt service, again, almost exactly where we thought it would be. We should not receive any more expenses out of that fund other than an ancillary, maybe administrative fee. But we should not have to adjust the debt service fund budget. Bond, we hope to zero out. We'll see what happens in the next 45 days. We did make a large payment on Lee Summit High School just in the last week. So we'll continue to track that. And when we have our finance committee meeting in June through the end of May, we should be able to give a pretty strong update there about where we'll end up. So then capital projects funds, I alluded to that earlier. You can see there that what we've budgeted and what we've spent, there's a difference between almost $4 million, just under $4 million. That's significant because we really have made the majority of our capital projects fund expenses. We'll have some more expenses that come in between now and the end of June, but the significant ones like the MIC lease payment, which was about $1.5 million, Those are finished. So we may have one more technology expense to the network that could hit that. But the bottom line is we should fall short of what we've budgeted in capital projects fund. If you remember from the January amendment, even with the $6 million transfer, we were showing that the capital projects fund could end around the balance could finish around the $8 million mark. If you track that, if we went ahead and decided to make the $6 million transfer at the end of this year, our balance should finish well above 10 million. And actually it would probably track closer to 12 million, where we would finish with an ending balance. So that leaves us with a decision, and a good decision. It's good to have options of when we get to the June meeting, we can decide, do we want to go ahead and transfer the total 6 million? And that may have an impact on our operating reserve. All right. If we decide to transfer 5 or 4, that means our operating reserve will remain a little higher. Again, big picture, the interplay between the Fund 1, Fund 4 transfer, it's all related to the amount that you decide to transfer will have an impact on your operating reserve. But the bottom line is, I think that we will have the flexibility at the June meeting to make that decision about what we want to do and where we want our ending fund balances really to end up. And we'll have the option to have them be a little bit lower, knowing that we want to go ahead and make a larger transfer into capital projects, or maybe we want to leave them a little higher, knowing that our capital projects fund will still be higher than what we anticipated, but not as high as it potentially could be. All right, moving down to the bottom right, just the restricted funds. When you look at nutrition services, we know that will end up lower than our balance last year. Again, that's largely a reflection of that payment that we received almost 2 years ago now in July of 2022. But we should stay above or close to the 2 million mark in nutrition services, and that's a surplus balance. Our activity, we're running a little bit ahead of where we were last year. That'll just be a reflection of money raised. Typically, we spend a little bit more money in the last 45 days, so we could see that get a little bit closer to where we ended last year. And then Bass, again, very positive. We still have a small deficit there, but as compared to last year, we've closed the gap by over $400,000. So we're making good headway there. If you look at our current balance, the bottom left, just our operating fund, where we're at, we still have very healthy balances. But really what you see there is a reflection of going back to what we first started talking about, is our operating fund revenue and that collection. You add $5 million to that, you're really tracking, ahead of where you thought you would be as compared to this point last year. So we know that our overall operating fund balance, the percentage wise will be a little bit lower as compared to last year. But when we budgeted, we anticipated that the total dollar amount should end up a little bit higher. And I do think again, we'll have a decision to make in June about where we want that, but it's still tracking pretty closely to what we thought. Any questions on the revenue and expense report? All right. Looking at our investment report, not much has changed since April. I'm sorry, since our end of March, since our April Finance Committee meeting. As you can see, we have just one item coming off this month, the CD, that actually in the realm of CDs was not a bad interest rate. Not good as compared to what we can earn now, but still not bad as comparison to some of our other CDs. We will have 3 more investments that come off before the end of this fiscal year. CD that actually is expiring today, and then the $1 million agency treasury, and then another CD. All of these are going to, as they expire, will have a positive impact on our investment report. Just take a quick moment. If you look at starting at July 31st, 2024, you see that CD there that expires. And then if you go down and you look at those interest rates, there is a 5% in there. But then you keep going down all the way, you see another 5.2. You get down to June 26th, I believe, of 2025. That's next fiscal year. So you're looking at all the investments that will expire next fiscal year. You still see a lot of opportunity there. Even if interest rates moderate, and we've seen that because the market is anticipating an eventual interest rate cut. But even if that happens next fiscal year, we still have an opportunity to increase our investment yield in UBS in particular. Now, moving on down to MOSIP and MOCAT, which is really where the majority of our funds lie. Again, the liquid rate is just, it's so attractive right now that our funds remain in there. As we cross the fiscal year, we'll likely go ahead and make some term investments because it is about, you can gain about 10 to 15 basis points based on the length of the term. But we're still in a really unique environment that if you get out past 3 months, 6 months, you're actually receiving less than you can get in your liquid. That's not common, but we've kind of been in that inverted scenario now for, it's probably getting close to a year. So we'll continue to monitor that. We'll grab some term investments. The key there is we just kind of like the term to not cross a fiscal year because you don't receive that interest until the term expires. And so we're kind of at the point now where we like to go ahead and have our money liquid through the end of the fiscal. That being said, if we saw something that we really liked, it wouldn't prevent us from going ahead and grabbing it prior to June 30th. Just a reminder, as you look at our total investment, if you look at that, you'd say, wow, we're $16 million less than we were at this point last year. Just a reminder that is due to, we made that $19 million prepayment. We saved millions of dollars in interest costs with that. And so that's the reason why you see that total investment, why you see such a disparity there between 166 million and 150. It's because we made that prepayment a few months ago. Any questions on the investment report? All right, finally, our balance sheet. Just a couple items there to call your attention to. When you look at our debt service fund, and I'm going down to the very bottom of this, our debt service fund, even though we're really slightly behind, and it's minor compared to what was budgeted in debt service, still have a healthy fund balance there of almost 14 million. And I do think we're still on track, that there is another 6 million potentially hanging out there next fiscal year that we might be able to prepay. Again, save some more interest dollars, open up a little more bonding capacity. And so right now with our fund balance, we're still on track to do that. I talked about the capital projects fund. If you go to the bottom, you look at that, our balance there is just over $7 million. So that's where I was talking about. Right now, we've budgeted a $6 million transfer from Fund 1 to Fund 4 at the end of the fiscal year. So hypothetically, if we spend another $1 million, we'll get a little bit of revenue in there. But if that balance goes down to $6 million even, that's where I was talking about. If we went ahead and made the $6 million transfer, our balance would actually end up at 12 in capital projects fund, which is quite a bit ahead of where we thought it would be in January. So that's where, we'll have a decision to make in June about where we want that to be. And we can talk about that at the time, but it's a good option to have, and it's a good decision to have to make at the end of the fiscal year. And we could even do that in July if we wanted to wait. You can actually wait until July to decide how much you want to transfer into that capital projects fund. The bond fund there balance, again, when you look at our ASBR, which is the end of the year report that we always file with the state in the fall, they combine those funds. And so when you look at the bond capital fund and the capital projects fund, it's all in the capital projects fund when you in the eyes of the state. So we are really getting to that point of the year. And one of the things I forgot to mention about the bond report when we were talking about that is we are really at the time of our bond projects where we are looking at actual expenses. What have we spent? Because encumbrances are not always dollar for dollar. In other words, you may encumber more, but that always includes contingency. And so when you release that encumbrance, that is actually money that is still available to use in the capital projects. So we're really at the point now where we're focusing on, we know we still have some things that are encumbered that we will spend, but we're really focusing on actual dollars that we've spent. And as we close out the fiscal year, that bond fund will really collapse back into the capital projects fund. That's our goal. Again, nutrition services, activity, and BASS, we talked about those on the revenue and expense report. BASS will get very close to zero. We probably won't make it by the end of the fiscal year, but that's really continuing to trend in a positive direction. Any questions on the balance sheet? All right. Thank you.
Mr. Holder, thank you. Moving on to section 4, other items, 4.01, future agenda items. There are a number of items on this list that will come off pending board approval tomorrow night. So what this list represents is just a look forward for our board members and our community to see those items and those projects that we're working on administratively. And as I've shared in the past, it takes us weeks and sometimes months to bring an agenda item forward. And so as you think about what's coming ahead, just know that these are the items that we're working on, that the board and the finance committee will review and consider for approval in the coming months. Item 4.02, summer 2024 projects. Last month, we presented a preliminary list. That list has been refined and cleaned up some. And so this is a more, say, realistic and accurate list of the items that we plan to work on this summer. It'll be revised a little more as we move forward. And as happens every summer, some of these projects get done. Some of them maybe get pushed a little bit later into the year, depending on how the summer goes. But this is just a list of all the projects we're working on this summer. Are there any questions about the future agenda items or the summer 2024 projects? This is first summer in a long time that we haven't had any bond projects that we've been managing. But I will tell you, as we've got a lot of other projects we're working on outside of bond projects. So our crew will be very busy this summer getting these things done and getting our buildings ready for next fall. All right, that concludes all the agenda items that we have for the Finance Committee meeting this morning. I just want to say welcome to Board Member Haley. Thank you for joining us today. You're a new member to the Finance Committee. We appreciate the insight of our board members. I see Dr. Johnson on here as well. Dr. Johnson, thank you for joining us as a past member of this committee. So we appreciate you being here. Yes, Board Member Haley.
I just thank you for inviting me, and I appreciate the sharing the information.
Well, there's, we are a large, complex organization, and, there's obviously the academic side of the work we do, but there's a really large business going on behind the scenes. And it's important that we all have a very clear understanding of what's going on and how it's working, and keeping a close eye and being good, responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And so this is an effort to ensure that happens. Thank you. That concludes our meeting for today.
Thank you.